The pandemic is creating change for us, right? There are a lot of other things going on. I'm going to talk about that in a minute that create that stress.
Rainer, can you maybe go here, because then people online can see you better.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
No worry. So let's talk about change a little bit. What is happening with us, right? So this is the rate of change, the vertical axis over time. And when we look at, let's say, 1,000 years until the Industrial Revolution, people lived pretty much the same as they were living. So when you had a lifespan of like 40 years, 45, people were dying earlier. Not much was changing. Sure, they had maybe a bigger plow at some point and they needed a second horse or whatever. But it's not like this, the way they were living was not so disruptive. It was gradually changing. Starting with the Industrial Revolution and beyond, internet time, and now we're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about a lot of changes, also externally driven, like climate change. We're talking about regional wars. Here we talk a lot about Ukraine, other places they talk about Middle East, but there's basically 80, at this moment, 80 regional conflicts that cause pain to people. They cannot only pain to people locally, they create stress here, at least with the mass migration that's going on. Demographic changes, and. So I could do a whole topic about change, because that's what strategic leaders study and say, okay, what I'm going to do about this. The issue with that is that, yes, while the world changes exponentially, the rate of change is going exponentially, we as humans, we can only change more linear. So the issues of adaptability, climate change would not be an issue if it would happen over time of 1,000 years. We probably would adapt much better than if it's just happening within 100 years or in 50 years, right? And that's with all the other changes too. It's too fast, too quickly. So what does that create? It creates stress in us, right? So leaders, company leaders, political leaders, they need to think about what I'm going to do with this, how I'm going to plan the future, where I'm going to invest, what I'm going to do with hiring, what I'm going to do with teaching my people. Today, many people don't know even if the job they're having right now, I mean the profession, I talk about that skill, if it will be needed in 10 or 20 years. It's true, right? Doesn't it create stress? For me it does, no? I have to say. So the issue is really, we are here with the change, where the orange box is, but that's where we are as a human being, so we're always behind. We're always behind. We have been behind, and we try to catch up, right? So that creates the stress, and so there's a big business in predicting the future, right? Gallup is one of these companies, but there are many others. Billions of dollars are spent in predicting the future. How reliable is predicting the future? In my experience, not, right? So people come up with scenarios how the future could turn out. They're mostly wrong. Look at the last election in the United States, right? Many people were surprised. So I'm not talking even about the political, the heartbreak. I'm talking about, people they have made bets on one or the other candidate and so on and so on. I could go on. So the question is, how are we going to lead in this scenario from a leading point of view? If you're a leader, how do you lead your life, your personal, your family, your community, the companies you're working in, maybe the whole world? How are we going to lead in that scenario? Predicting the future and then following up and trying to catch up creates a lot of stress. So I argue we need new ways of leading. And for me, the new way of leading is that we imagine the future we want to create, and then we use all these changes and tools we have to create that future. Okay? It's a different paradigm. It's a different way of thinking about it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, for me, the essence of leadership is creating a vision of an aspirational future and then influencing people to change their behavior to make that vision a reality. Very simple vision. It's more transformational leadership rather than just managing the status quo. We have a lot of those leaders too, and it's fine for many situations, maybe right, but for the scenario I'm describing, that's not a good way to lead. So that's the definition we're going to work with as I go through these emotions. Okay? Any questions before I move forward? No? So I would like to start with 3 premises. The first, each of you can lead positive change no matter where you are. You don't need to be a manager. You can be a manager, people manager, but you don't have to. Leading change means changing behavior, starting with your own behavior. So you can influence others to change their behavior. And last, change behavior requires a shift in emotions, which you can learn because emotions are driving our behavior. So I want to talk a little bit about how much emotions drive our behavior. So what do you think the percent of decisions, what percent of decisions are made rationally? Do you have a number? Percentage number between 1 and 100?
In business or
Oh.
in business or privately?
Anywhere.
Anywhere.
General, as a human being, we humans, how our brain works, like how we make decisions.
One person in chat says 20%.
Yeah, that's pretty close.
Another one 15%.
That's very good. And that's the latest research from Stanford. This from January was published. It's between 10 and 15%. Okay, there have been older studies that show different numbers, but it's always a much higher ratio. And there's other research done that shows that many of our decisions are made subconsciously, which means they are driven by something else than our rational mind. Which leaves us with 85 to 90%. Emotions have effect on our decision making. That's a ratio from 8 to 9, right? Roughly, right? So that's a much stronger indicator. So how you feel, if I know how you feel as a manager, as a person in a relationship, I'm going to be able to predict how you're going to behave in any given situation. And I will go into those feelings as well. So there's over 250 emotions, experts say. They argue about it. Doesn't matter how much, the exact number is not really important. The point is, it's very hard to learn emotions because it's so complex. And it is so complex because imagine 250 emotions, and you are always in an emotional state. You're never not in an emotional state. You might not be aware of it. You might think, oh, I'm very rational right now, and many people say, no, let's talk rationally about this. They are in an emotion, and I know that I'm in an emotion at any given time. But it's a mix of emotion. It's any permutation of these 250 emotions. Maybe there's 5. In emotional psychology and in executive coaching, we talk about a dominant emotion. There's one emotion that's stronger than the other, but the others, they all play into it, and it's very hard to decipher sometimes we look at somebody doing something and we shake our heads, right? Doesn't make sense. That person even doesn't know why they behave that way because they are not aware of their emotions, right? So I boiled it down to 7 essential emotions, and this comes really from 50 years of working, or more than 50 years of working as a leader, as well as coaching and developing leaders. And it comes out of, I have done innovations myself. I have helped companies to innovate, create transformational change, each on the individual level as well as the large scale level, so large transformation. And these were the emotions that I, from my experience, from my observation, picked out and said, in this specific leadership situation, what emotions do you need to feel in order to show the behavior that you're effective leading in that moment? Okay, we will go through those scenarios. So I boiled it down to the 7. I had tested them with many great minds that work in that field, both that study emotions as well as that are leadership experts and other people, and they have confirmed them. Let's start with the first one. So the blue side is the behaviors that we want to see in a leader, okay? Or in any person that wants to create positive change. And caring, which is basically part of your motto, right? Being a caring company. I know other companies also, but not all companies are caring. There's actually, most companies are not, don't have a caring culture. And it's proven that companies that have a caring culture, that cultivate a caring culture and behavior, that they are much more successful than these other companies. There's a lot of research being done, okay? Caring, what is caring driven about? Any idea what drives caring? What the emotion is that you need to feel in order to care about somebody's needs?
Empathy.
Exactly. And it is, empathy is also a complex emotion that we talk about in the simplest way about emotional empathy or cognitive empathy. they break it even down further. But emotional empathy is I feel what you feel. When you feel something, it resonates with me. I can feel it. I might not feel exactly the same, but I feel it. That something is going on with you. This could be a positive feeling you have. It could be also a negative. You might be suffering, and I pick up that suffering and I suffer at the same time. But you might also be happy, and I feel your happiness, and it makes me happy, feeling happy. So that's emotional empathy. So in this context, we're talking about emotional empathy that drives caring. I had an experience many, many years ago. I was on a trip in Asia, on a business trip, and I couldn't sleep at night. I was in jet lag. Next morning, I had high-stake negotiation, and I said I wanted to distract myself. I turned on the TV, and a documentary was running about an ethnic war in Africa. Two ethnic groups were fighting each other, and paramilitary soldiers of one ethnic group was invading the villages of the other group, grabbing the children and cutting off the arms of that tribe, of that community. That was not this was bad, but what they did in addition, they forced the fathers with a gun to their head to hold the arms while they cut it off. And I was a father, I'm a father. My son was that age, and I was crying. I was sitting in front of TV, far away, I didn't know the people. I learned empathy in this moment. I learned empathy for people I had never seen in my life. So empathy can be learned. This was a radical way of learning empathy, a very painful way, but it created this realization in me that I can create an emotional shift about somebody that is far away. If something happens, if there's a learning moment, this was a learning moment, right? It's easier to feel empathy for people that are close to us, our children, our friends, our parents, our spouses, husbands, partners, and so on, neighbors. So that's the first thing. Go ahead.
Is it allowed to interrupt with questions, or we do it later?
Later, we have a Q&A, if that's okay?
Yeah.
So empathy drives caring. The next behavior is serving. So if I care for your needs, as a leader, want to create positive change, then the question, what do I do with my caring, right? Just I sit there and care? No, I need also to serve the needs. If, let's say, I care, and I learned that your best friend died, you were colleagues at work, and so I sit there and care, but that doesn't help you, right? What would help you if I come and say, can I do anything for you? Can I cook a meal for you? Can I make a call or take over some of your work, maybe a client commitment you had? That is then serving your need. And that is true also at a larger scale in terms of, we call it servant leadership. The question is, what triggers serving? What is the emotion? Empathy is not enough, because empathy makes me only feel what you're feeling and I care, but I'm not doing anything. What we need is compassion. Compassion is the emotion that includes empathy and builds on empathy. It's always coupled with empathy, but it adds the commitment, our commitment to act on our caring. Okay? Make sense? Now, as a leader, very often, I don't know if you have seen this, I have seen it often. Like a new leader comes in, doesn't really understand what's going on, but feels forced to make quick changes and decisions, because the leader was hired to make changes, to create transformation. But mostly, sadly, the leaders come in without understanding, making decisions, and they, how do you say, you pull the baby out with the bath, right? So too quickly making decisions without understanding. There's a famous person from Hamburg, Helmut Schmidt. He was interviewed on BBC during the financial crisis in 2008. And the interviewer, the journalist, asked him, what do you think is the big problem, with this financial crisis? Why we are struggling so much? And he said, none of these leaders understands the financial system. The reason why this exponential change curve, things have changed so quickly, whatever they studied in school about the financial system was obsolete. And then he said, oh, maybe Juncker, maybe he understands a little bit about it. He had this cool commenting and so on. I don't know if he was right or not. That's not the point. But he made a point, very often leaders don't understand. We as individuals, sometimes we come to a conclusion because of bias or something else, and we make decisions on things we're not understanding. So understanding is the next behavior which is driven by interest. Interest is the emotion that creates a sustained effort to understand something deeply. It's a little bit different from curiosity. Curiosity is more like, oh, I'm watching a crime movie or series or read a crime novel, and all what I want to know is, was the gardener the murderer, or was it the husband, or was it the butler? You know, things like that. And when I find out, my curiosity disappears. With interest, my curiosity is not disappearing. I'm going to have a deep interest. You go deeper and deeper to understand the full complexity of something. Okay? So those three behaviors, caring, serving, understanding, driven by empathy, compassion, and interest, build the foundation for any leader. This helps you to gain a deeper understanding about your stakeholders' needs, it makes you care, and it makes you also committed to do something about it. Nelson Mandela, he's used to be the president of South Africa, you know, transitioning the country from apartheid to a democratic state with, you know, elections and so on. And he was 27 years in prison, and before he got imprisoned, he was actually pretty radical in trying to change the society through force, through violence. But in prison, he learned that change can happen in another way. And he cultivated these three behaviors and these emotions during those 27 years. He cultivated them in a way that he had always white guards that were watching him and so on. So his oppressors, that he developed empathy, he developed compassion, he developed a deep interest in their lives. Later, when this is his guard, Christo Brandt, they met, you know, as friends after he was liberated. But then when he became president, like other countries, they fall in upheaval. They, like people, like we talk about Bosnia, we talk about the conflict in Rwanda and so on, where really butchering went on. We have other, you know, big transformation changes in society. They didn't happen, they didn't go so well, they were very violent. This didn't go so violent. His way of having compassion for all South Africans, including the white South Africans that were the oppressors, even if there was all the reason to have a revenge, this didn't happen. He led it in a different way. So that's a difference this emotion makes for a leader. So now you have a good understanding of your leadership, you know, your stakeholders and what you're leading and so on, and why, and your motivation. And then the question is to come up with a vision. We talked about a new paradigm of leading. So coming up with a state of the future in your mind that is highly desirable, that's aspirational. So I call it visioning here. And that's driven by optimism. Pessimism doesn't allow you to think positively about the future, because pessimism saying, oh, it's not going to work. Optimism is the lens into the future. Okay? And all of these emotions, I have to say, and I'm going to make the comment later, they also have a big contribution to your feeling of well-being. We talk about health and well-being, right? In terms of how you relate to people and how you relate to yourself. These are intrinsically positive interest, and optimism are intrinsically positive emotions that, you know, if you go with them in the morning to work and home in the evening, you're just feeling better, you have a better well-being, right? Because emotions have also a somatic effect on us, right? We feel them in the body. Let me talk about the effect of optimism and vision on an example of large-scale change, right? So I grew up near the border to East Germany on the western side, near Fulda. And I grew up on the western side, and I could speak freely without any repercussion. I didn't need to fear that something happened to me. While my cousin Heinz on the other side was executed just for speaking up. The system in East Germany was very repressive. They had a secret police, the Stasi. People, you know, couldn't trust each other. Had also huge health impact. Actually, people were feeling very, very sick. I interviewed a lot of people, how they were feeling. They're feeling oppressed, they were hopeless, that change would be possible. Didn't mean they did not dream. They did dream about a better future. If you were an artist, you wished someday I could go to the Louvre and I don't need to just look at it in picture books, things like that, right? If I like to travel, you wished, you had to dream, maybe I want to go to Italy instead of to Bulgaria. I'm forced to go only to this country. And so not that it would be bad, but that you could freely do what you want. So still in July 1989, people were very pessimistic. A good friend of mine, Anke Jan, she was born in Leipzig, and she later told me, no, in July we did not believe that any change was possible. We were totally pessimistic. People were beaten down in the street if they demonstrated. They were taken in for interrogation, etc., etc. It was very, very depressed mood. So as a result of that, people were fleeing in the thousands. This is the Hungarian border crossing to Austria. My friend Anke, she crossed over to Yugoslavia. At that time was Yugoslavia, and then over to Greece, and it was very traumatic escape also, and very risky. Now, September, something changed. September in Leipzig was leading the movement. There were two young pastors, Christoph Wonneberg and Christian Führer. They were hosting the Monday Peace Prayers in the Nikolai Church, St. Nikolai Church, every Monday. So people could connect and they could express their grievance, and they prayed, but it was more like a social connection, not to feel alone in this situation. It started with a handful of people. After the peace prayer, they went out and demonstrated peacefully. Some held up signs and so on. This increased to 7,000 people in only 5 weeks, so Monday after Monday, to 120,000 people another week later, and to 320,000 people another week later on October 23rd. There was more people walking in the street than watching from behind the curtain in Leipzig. Other cities followed, encouraged by what they saw in Leipzig, and millions of people were demonstrating. Not all the people were on the street, but it was significant. The pressure on the government in East Germany was so strong that on November 9th, Jürgen Schabowski announced at midnight or tonight, from immediately, if you have a passport of the DDR, East Germany, you can cross the border. And it was a little bit of a mistake, and there was a little bit of confusion about it. The border guards were not informed, and it's a long story. I want to shorten it a little bit. That night, the pressure became so strong that one of the border guards, Harald Jäger, Bornholmer Straße, he, based under that pressure and huge stress, opened the gate and let people through. Other border guards followed, and then we saw the people flooding over. They didn't want to flee, they just wanted to see, is it possible? They had their kids at home. Basically, they left the houses and the kids were sleeping at home, right? And so that was the peaceful revolution. But why did it happen? That before, people were escaping and they were afraid to be, going into prison if they did something. Why were they suddenly going into the streets? It was an emotional shift. Suddenly they had the courage, but courage alone was not enough. They also needed to believe I can have courage, and it's a senseless courage, like I do something just to show courage, but I don't believe that it changes anything. No, they believe if I walk down the stairs from behind the curtain, I go down the street and join the movement, that something is going to happen. They might not have known that intellectually at that moment, but that was the emotional shift from being pessimistic that change is possible, or even resigned, to becoming optimistic. And it created that peaceful revolution, it created that big movement. We can do that with our own life, we can observe it and test it, where I am emotionally. Am I pessimistic about something I want to do? If I want to do a new job, but I want a new relationship or some venture or travel, whatever it is, am I optimistic that it will have a good outcome, or I'm pessimistic? And you will see, if you're pessimistic, you are hesitating to do something. If you're optimistic, you're going to do it. That was the vision they had, freedom. Very simple vision, right? And the vision was a higher aspiration, which provides a deeper commitment and a long-term ongoing commitment. If you have in your company, with your company or your team, or for your own personal life, if you have such a vision that is aligned with your highest aspiration, you also will put a sustained effort behind it, and you will provide a sustained commitment, a deep commitment, and you will work on it every day because it's so important, and that was what happened to them. So, as much as emotions can be used to drive positive behavior, there's also emotions that hold us back to move even to that emotion. So I call them barriers. And resentment is one of those that I find in companies and organizations and communities quite frequently. Resentment is the emotion that is associated with the feeling of being treated in an unfair way. It could be a friend that lied to you. It could be somebody you tried to help but he was not thankful. It could be a boss that overlooked you for a promotion. It could be somebody that crossed you in traffic, you know, and without signaling where to go. It could be anything, but it's the emotion of victimhood. Okay, so John, one of my clients many years ago, he was reporting to the CEO of a company, and she recommended him to find a coach. And her main complaint was that he was not a visionary leader, that he was micromanaging, that he had a team of 20 people, a very strategic team that brought in the money for this organization, and he met his quota. He worked 80 hours a week. He put fires out, and she said, "But you're not a leader. You are not a visionary leader. You're a micromanager, and yeah, you make your quota, but you're just working too hard and in the wrong direction." And so we came out of that three-way meeting as starting the coaching engagement, went into his office, and I said, and he was his head down. He didn't look healthy. He looked depressed. He looked beaten up. He had also told me that his relationship with his wife had deteriorated, and with his children and family life. This whole situation was like not good. He was not healthy. His well-being was really bad. And I said, "Tell me what just went on in this room, how you were feeling. Can you name an emotion that you were feeling?" And he shook his head, and he was so beaten down. And I said, "Tell me a little bit about your relationship." And she always complains that I'm never good enough, and she always wants me to be a visionary leader, and I think I'm a visionary leader. All my bosses told me that. And I said, "It looked like, John, that you are feeling some resentment." And he said, "That's it." Immediately. And I said, "You know, resentment is the emotion of victimhood." "Yeah, I feel like a victim," he said. So I explained to him, "John, if you want to come over resentment," and he committed. He said, "Help me how to overcome resentment." And he tried to work on this. He tried to work on this direction, right? Shifting from feeling resentment to optimism. Okay. I told him, "John, that's not going to work. I don't know why. I have explanations from experience, but I cannot, at the deepest level, I cannot 100% explain it. The only explanation that I have is when you have resentment, you live in the past. So you rehash the injustice that's happened to you. We have that sometimes with whole societies. Sometimes it leads to a revolution or to a uproar or whatever, because it explodes then. But if you rehash that action of injustice that you felt again and again, which means it takes you in the past again and again, you have no energy, mental energy left to think about the future. Does that make sense? Right? So resentment is a big barrier. There's other barriers to optimism. So how do you get out of it? Okay. So there's another emotion which is resignation. So if you get stuck too long in resentment, you can fall into resignation because you don't find a way out of it. You said, "No, nothing I do, I'm always the victim. I'm always like mistreated," right? So from resentment to resignation, there's definitely no way to optimism because you have already given up, right? Kind of. So what do? There's another wonderful emotion. It's for me very healing that We use also when we have losses in life, when somebody dies that we love, when we lose a job, when maybe we lose a relationship, whatever it is, or something other valuable, which is acceptance. And acceptance is kind of a neutral. It's not necessarily future-oriented, nor is it past-oriented, but it's more in the moment. Resentment means, acceptance means, in this case, does not mean I like that you mistreated me, that I have to love it. It just says, I know it's not good for me to get stuck in resentment and rehash it. It's actually destroying me. So I'm going to accept, because it happened in the past and I cannot change it. It's that realization. It's what happened with John. When I lead John through it, he immediately, that same day, he went to acceptance and he never went back. If I talk to him today, he has a leader who leads now organization of nearly 10,000 people. And he's like, he looks healthy, his relationship with his wife is better. That was not the main goal of the coaching, but it was a side effect in terms of well-being for him to move out of that barrier to optimism. And he's a very optimistic leader today, and he's really a transformational leader now. And we work together on similar issues that he has with his leaders in his organization. So from acceptance, then, it's much easier to move to optimism because you're not stuck in the past. So you have a vision of the future that you aspire to achieve. The question is then, you need people to help you achieve it, and that's where mobilization comes in, right? If you have a startup, you need to hire people or attract people. If you need investors, you need to mobilize investors. If you have an existing team and you have a new idea you want to implement with your team, maybe a new charter, a new task, you need to mobilize them. I was giving a workshop on Monday in Fulda at the Chamber of Commerce, and all these leaders that were there, that were like mid-company leaders, they had the same issue, was motivating employees, motivating people to get really the best, get them fully engaged, okay? That's what mobilizing means. And what is the emotion that helps you mobilize people? What do the people need to feel in order to feel mobilized, really committed?
Motivation?
That's not necessarily an emotion, but it is, yes, you want to motivate them, but the question is, how do we motivate them? The old way of motivating is with a carrot and stick, right? If you don't do what I do, I'm going to punish you. If you do it, I give you maybe better benefit, a little bit better salary, or maybe a day off and things like that. Very short-term oriented motivation effect. The one that provides a long-term motivation effect is inspiration. Inspiration is deeper and sustained. Okay? And one way to inspire is if you connect to a higher aspiration. If you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like getting a better salary, maybe an increase of 5% is more at the lower level of the hierarchy of needs. But if you go to higher aspirations, maybe like freedom, or something, a self-actualization, your career goals, or making a difference in the world in any part of life that you desire, that's more aspirational, and that inspires you, right? So if you have a boss that I have managed and led many people around the world, if I had a career conversation saying, where do you want to go? Oh, my dream is this and this. These conversations happen very rarely in companies, right? So I've asked them, so if you could dream, let's say you had all the freedom, then people would say, oh, I'm dreaming about that, but they're afraid of saying it to their bosses because they're afraid they're getting fired or they're getting moved to the side, right? So that conversation is very helpful. Connecting to higher aspirations, of career aspirations, helps you to motivate your employees, and also it makes you feel better, and them also, they know you're a supportive manager, right? The next is then you have mobilized people, you still need to coordinate effective actions. So whatever goal you have, so collaboration is really the behavior. And collaboration is driven by trust. Trust is one of the most complex emotions that I have studied. Do I trust that you care? Do I trust that you mean what you say? Do I trust that you are competent? That I want to hire you or put you on a job. Are you competent? But that's not enough. Do I trust that you're not only competent, but you're also reliable, which means you show this competence day after day. Okay. So those are the 4 dimensions of trust. Very often we say, I don't trust you, but we need to look deeper what trust means in order to coach somebody or develop trust. What type of trust am I talking about? And by the way, societies where trust is high perform much better. They are much greater well-being in those societies. This has been studied by sociologists for years. Trust in companies where trust is high, people like to go to these companies. They're looking forward in the morning. They build friendships, right? But when trust is low, people get sick. They don't. In East Germany, people did not trust each other. They were not doing well. They were not feeling well. Okay, so let's assume trust is there and they're collaborating towards the vision, but things go wrong from time to time. There's backslashes, there's setbacks, like the pandemic. I had coached a lot of CEOs, like small companies, startups, and so on. We had developed plans together, they had got the investment, and suddenly everything crashed. So what do you do then? You need to be resilient. Being resilient is the ability to overcome setbacks. This could be for your personal life, this could be in a team context, it could be a whole societal context. And what Barbara Fredrickson, she's a psychology researcher in Berkeley, she found out that what drives resiliency, what fosters resiliency is positive emotions. It's there's a whole palette of positive emotions. Okay? These are just a few examples, right? Some already mentioned: optimism, inspiration, interest, and so on. But there's others like joy, hope, confidence, curiosity, pride, gratitude, serenity, and so on. So you can cultivate these emotions. When I was going through the pandemic with all the stresses of my clients and so on, and my wife said, Reinhard, you are not the same anymore. You become so negative, and I really became a little bit short and was reading the news and so on, and I said, I got to do something about it, no? And so I went back and looked at it, and I said, which of these positive emotions do I want to cultivate in order to be more resilient? So I picked joy. So I made a list and said, what are all the things that create joy? And I bring those more into my day. So I decided, okay, I'm not going to start the first 2 hours to work. The first 2 hours I'm going to focus on doing things that bring joy. Like I like to go into nature, listening to music, have a nice breakfast, with somebody, coffee. And it changed everything. I became more productive. My wife liked me more. It's true. So I just want to offer that as a way to build resiliency, and it is measured. It's actually physically measured. We come faster down from high blood pressure, high pulse, and so on. This is an example of resiliency and how positive emotions work. Does anybody know Shostakovich's Symphony No. 7? Okay, no, not a problem. Not a required reading. But Hitler had decided when he invaded the Soviet Union, Russia, and so on, to take Leningrad without engaging German soldiers to fight in Leningrad. So he surrounded them and decided to not let anybody food in, and to starve them to death. It was a very evil plan. And it worked initially, so people died in the 100,000s, over 500,000. And Shostakovich was a composer and musician that decided, I want to do something to fight the war, to help my Leningraders, as he said. And he started to write Symphony No. 7 to build up people's mood. And later he wrote for a year and so on, and later his life was at risk, and he was fleeing and was brought to a safe place to finish the symphony. Symphony was brought back in secretly overnight. But all the musicians had died or were dying. They were like living in their apartments with open, broken windows, and they brought them back to life. They found a number of them, and they gave them extra food rations and so on, and they made them perform this symphony in the symphony hall. They put loudspeakers in the streets. The loudspeakers made also the Germans at the front hear it. And they played the symphony and people were in awe. When they were finished, they jumped up, they hugged each other. They were crying, they were so moved, full of joy, of pride, of awe, of any emotions that you can imagine that brought back to life. That was later, in the historians call this the turning point in the war. This is when the Germans lost the war. It was an emotional shift to resiliency. They went up, the spring started, they planted cabbage and things like that, it became self-sufficient. And the German soldier was interviewed, said, when we heard this music, we said, we're never going to take the city. Somebody who could write this beautiful music has such a spirit that we cannot take. That soldier reported. That's the power of positive emotions. You can expand your circle of influence by applying these emotions to yourself, cultivating them, to your close circle, to your expanded circle, or to a new circle of people. That's where you grow your influence, right? Your team maybe, your family, your organization, outside your organization. You can always start with one person, apply, you say start with yourself. Like compassion, you start with self-compassion. Learning self-compassion can be transformational, right? Because you're doing something, that's self-compassion, right? You're coming here, right now saying I'm doing something for my well-being, my health. This is just one act of it. You can do many more things. But without self-compassion, without feeling these emotions for yourself, you cannot help other people feel those emotions. It's not possible. If you're not optimistic, you're not going to make other people feel optimistic. If you're not inspired, you're not going to inspire people. If you don't feel trust for your people, they're not going to trust you, right? This is Srinivas, he's an Indian global technology executive that I coached several years ago. He said, a couple of years later, after we finished, he said, Anna, my life has changed. I mean, my relationships have changed. I've been able to increase my circle of influence steadily. He used to lead a team of a handful of people when he hired me, and he felt nervous, he was anxious, he didn't know how do I lead these people. Now, even though I'm leading a much larger organization, at that time he led an organization actually from 1,000 people. He was transforming the cloud technology for like one of the top 50 companies in the world. And he said, I feel confident about it. And when I saw him, I said, Srini, you look so different. You look so, yeah, he said, I feel totally different. I mean, his whole well-being was changed, his confidence had changed, and so on. But really cultivating these emotions in himself and in others. Okay. So I give you 3 premises at the beginning. Premise number 1, each of you can lead positive change no matter where. To change, to lead, to create the change you want, you need to change behavior starting with your own. The third one is, in order to change behavior, you need to shift your emotions, which you can learn. The fourth one, if you cultivate these emotions, and with the associated behavior, your well-being will increase dramatically. And this is by observation. There's been no doctorate written about it. This is just like by observation. I feel it, and the people that I work with feel it as well. That's my fourth premise I want to leave you with. If you want to read more, this is available both in English and in German. And there it has exercises for each of the emotions. Sometimes I recommend pick one and read the practices. If you just improve one, you start with one, and then the next one, say you have an issue with trust, let's start with this, or say I need to inspire more rather than motivate people, so carrot and stick, then dive into this one. There's very good exercises, best practices in there. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rainer. Is there any questions online and also here in the audience?
You want to start? I thought what would...
No, it's fine.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much. This is probably one of the most impactful talks I've attended so far. And I wanted to ask you regarding acceptance and resignation.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between those, and what practices can we have to fall more into acceptance rather than resignation?
Yeah. So the important thing to recognize is when you get stuck in the resentment, the risk of falling into resignation, because the longer it goes on, you say, no matter what I do, I'm always end up on the bad side of history. I'm always like being the victim of some circumstances. Some say, what is there as bad people? You know, I cannot change. Or I heard that in another presentation that there's just bad people. Sure, but if you believe that all the bad people in the world are all after you, you're going to fall in resignation, right? Because I cannot fight against that evil in the world. Acceptance is basically say, okay, something happened to you for whatever reason, and you put it behind you so that you can move on, right? It's actually the opposite to resignation, because you get to a neutral emotional feeling in a way which opens the door to optimism or future-oriented emotion. So future-oriented emotion is optimism, hope, anticipation, excitement. So those, they propel you into the future. If you think about your future and you have, let's say, a goal in mind, or a wish or a dream of something, to be in that emotional state helps you gives you the energy to move towards that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. She was next.
Very inspiring presentation, thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, how old was John when he made his transformation?
Yeah.
Was he in the middle age?
Yeah, he was
more
middle-
age of 50?
Yeah, he was about, I would say, calculate back, I think it was about 48.
Okay.
He's now 55 or so, and in his prime. I mean, I can really say, every time I see him, I'm so proud of him, and he would say that was my turning point in my life.
And the second question, I have a daughter, and when she was very young, when I brought her to the kita, she was really, if one child crying, she cried with this child, being so empathic. And I wonder, when do we lose this empathy? Because I think all children have it naturally. Is it a matter of education? Is it a matter of society? Is it more that we feel, yeah, you don't have to show too much, because otherwise you get also hurt, you can be hurted, or when do you think we lose it, and how is it possible to cultivate it and to keep it?
Yeah, so there's different indicators, and it's quite complex, right? But one is that as we get older, like in our society, we have been trained not to show emotions. Emotions used to be as a negative thing. And I still remember I was leading and coaching people in the US, like as a manager, and I said, how do you feel today? And they felt offended that I asked for how they're feeling, and they didn't want to make themselves vulnerable by sharing their feelings, which I respected. I'm not saying that was a bad thing or that bad people, that had nothing to do with it, but that is one thing, like not to feel vulnerable. As a child, it's okay to feel vulnerable, right? But we unlearn. So we see feeling vulnerable as it's connected to trust, right? So if we don't trust the people, let's say our colleagues, our boss, or our teacher, if we don't trust them, we're not going to show our emotions, and we are not going to, we're going to kill empathy. The other thing is, there's research about it, the higher you move in the hierarchy, let's say in a corporation or in society, the less empathy and compassion leaders feel. That has been measured. They become less empathetic and less compassionate. They didn't say, the research paper didn't say what the causes were, but my theory is you move away from the people, that you dehumanize them, right? If you, the less somebody human is, I've worked with homeless, for example, and the problem of getting rid of homelessness, how do you transform it? And those people that have very often seen, they couldn't help the homeless because they couldn't put themselves into their shoes. They tried to force a solution on them without understanding them. They say, oh yeah, homeless, he's homeless because he drinks too much, or he's lazy, or whatever. They made a story up, but there could be, so we changed that paradigm and say, okay, the homeless people is a human like you, they have feelings like you. If you use these emotions, we use these emotions, saying, if you find out what this person inspires this person, you're going to create the energy to bring them out of the homeless long term, unless there's a fundamental mental health issue that need to be addressed first, right? That's a different scenario. But these are two indicators that I see that would explain what you say. I'm not sure if it's a full explanation.
We have one question online from Roxana. Is there any tip of how to move whenever you recognize your anger, resentment? especially focused also with teenagers.
I had a wonderful, with my daughter, we have this conversation always. She's turning 13 next week. And she had these bursts of anger or frustrations or from school back home. She talked about my back, like a girlfriend or whatever. And so we had this practice of like sitting, not doing anything, just sit next, I'm holding my arm, and we breathe together, no? So you need to get to a neutral state, right? You got to calm yourself down. So there's, I would say, in terms of what I read and also practically with all the, but in terms of brain research, neurological research, it's kind of this, it's meditation, breathing, awareness generation activates the regions in our brain that calm us down, right? And from that new calmness, like, you know, you sort of call it like the Buddha type of state or the king type of state where you can suddenly see, if you act from that perspective, you see more possibilities to act. When it comes to, let's say, dealing with others' anger, that also helps because now you can, that you don't react immediately to that anger, which is we feel, somebody's angry, now I'm getting more, I can show you I'm more angry than you, right? It's like becomes a little bit a shouting game or whatever. Not helpful at all because it's an upward spiral of escalation, right? That's how some wars happen, right?
Any more questions?
There was one.
Yeah, there was one question. I would like to build again back to the first question, going from, so I can follow your explanation coming from resentment towards acceptance to optimism. And I was just wondering if you have a person who is already in resignation, how to bring that person into acceptance? Because I could not really think of an option how to do that.
That's too late.
Oh, it's too late. And
Yeah.
what is then the solution?
That's a very, I don't have a good solution for that. I would say this person needs psychological help.
Okay.
Yeah. I would say if that's a very dangerous state to be in, no? Now I'd say there's sometimes there's a good it's more a combination of resignation and acceptance. I used to do martial arts when I was a young man, and there was like when you do this thing where you fight with each other and it's all very peaceful and respectful, and when the other one has won, like you underneath or whatever, you give them a sign, and that's when you resign, but it's a positive way, saying, okay, you won, but it's a sports type of sign, right? And I accept at the same time. So you can have scenarios where you have it, but when it comes to, let's say, the scenario of life, I give up, life is not getting me anywhere, and you fall into resignation to give up on life, that is, I would say, person, when you observe that, to get help, psychological help. And I have clients that has a couple of times in my time that I have been coaching people, executives and so on, where I could say this needs a professional help, maybe even medical intervention with medicine and so on. So that becomes dangerous. But there's resignation. I want to just put that in contrast, where that can be a good thing, you know, not to keep fighting a fight that you cannot win. Yeah.
Maybe that's then a good point or a good time to also talk with the employee whether to come to us, to Good for Me, because we have a lot of help, we have psychological support, and there's experts that might help in this kind of situation. Of course, this employee needs to decide for themselves to take the help, but yeah, maybe in this kind of situation, you can also ask us if we can support you on this topic. Yeah.
Wonderful, that's great. It's good to know the sources.
Well, I actually have the same. The other one was, you mentioned at the start you have a lot of, or you have experience in also leading transformational change in organization. From your experience, what are key factors, or also related to the 7 emotions, to do this successful, both for the employer and the employee?
Yeah, this is a wonderful question, and this is something that like everybody faces, right? This is the most difficult thing in leadership. It's transformational leadership, and that's what I specialize in. There's on the one side the big challenge that it provides, and there's always resistance to transformational change, right? There's an internal resistance, but the resistance does not come from everyone. There's like, so I like the adoption curve for change. It's a bell-shaped curve where you have people that are excited about the change, it's only a few, and there's the people that resisted, and the middle part is like ambivalent, they're like maybe, they're not sure, right? So the one thing is to focus on the one that are excited, so you have a stronger force. But the other thing is the emotional shift itself. So when I go into, like I coach a lot in, or work with indigenous communities who are much worse off than anybody else in society. In the United States, life expectancy of 55, high drug abuse, unemployment, etc., etc. I don't need to go into all the measures. So it's a hopeless situation where resignation very often sets in, that the change is much harder. But you need a leader that believes in the change. Number one, ideally there's a group of leaders, so you mobilize those that are excited about the change. And the other thing is that you have a vision that is inspiring. And so when I work with these indigenous groups, I always make them create a vision, and they are not so, let's say, focused on words, more on images. And I have an artist, and while they talk and speak out their vision, I create exercises to do that. Then the artist develops that vision on the wall as images. I could have built a slide in there. Sometimes I have it in there. You can see how it looks like. And then they look at it after 3-day retreat, and first they feel like almost like a sign, and they come out and they say, wow, this is how it could be. This is how we could save our children. This is how we could survive. No? And suddenly they feel inspired. Now you still have to do the work, how we're going to create this. That's then strategy work that needs to be done. And that takes these other emotions, right, to understand interest, the commitment to do something. It takes the other emotions like to coordinate effective actions, and then to inspire, to mobilize other people to help. So that is, and resilience and so on. So all of these emotions play a role, but a different role in the different life cycle of the transformational change.
Yes. To be mindful with the time, I will stop the questions now here. Anybody's welcome to stay a little bit longer if you want, also online. But officially, I would like to close down the session. And yeah, Rainer is so nice and would like to give to you as a present a book. And we talked about how can we do like a lottery, and we didn't come up with a good idea. So actually, we decided that the first 3 questioning people would receive a book. So we have here in the room you two, and we also have Roxana who online asked for a question. Roxana, we will. I wrote down your name, so I will get in contact with you. And yes, I will give you the honor to give the book to the meeting.
But maybe I can make a fair suggestion. We can maybe head over. I wouldn't mind it. Or
Yeah.
give the
Or you-
name